There's a ton of new content creators spewing out trash tier videos trying to make it in the gacha genre with Wuthering Waves coming up. I figured I'd add to the absolute landfill with my analysis on why Wuthering Waves will end up succeeding. Success can mean many different things, so let's define it for the video. To some, it simply means making a profit, and to others, it means how good the game is, even if it's a small indie game. In this video, my measure of success will be relevancy and how good the game is. Game quality may not be viewed as something that contributes to success by everyone, but the more satisfied a player is with the game, the more likely they are to continue playing and spending on it. To start us off, let's take a look at the many different reasons that draw people towards video games and see what Wuthering Waves has from these things that can appeal to people. A game shouldn't need all these things that I list to be good, and the points I'm going to list are in no particular order. Aesthetic, sound design, quality of life, gameplay, story, movement, performance, multiplayer, challenges, rewards, replayability, new player experience, and character design. Let's start with aesthetic. The saying, "don't judge a book by its cover," is simply something that doesn't apply to people. When looking for games to play, the first thing that will catch your eye is the aesthetic. Now, of course, aesthetics are subjective. Everyone has their own tastes regarding how colorful they like games being, as well as the art styles they like. Pretty, bright, vibrant colors are a treat for the eyes, and that's why children will practically always gravitate towards whatever's most colorful. With that being said, my opinion on this is that Wuthering Waves is going to absolutely surpass expectations regarding visual presentation. Based on the trailers we've seen, such as the Encore trailer, and comparing it to the trailers we've seen from Punishing Grey Raven, which is Kuro's previous game, it's clear as day that they've made astounding improvements to their character trailers. PGR character trailers have also improved, of course, but just looking at the difference between the trailer of the Wuthering Waves character and PGR character, Wuthering Waves looks a lot more polished. During the developer interview 3 months ago, they'd mentioned that they'd end up improving the atmosphere of the game by adapting it to be more lively during some parts and then darker during others. This is a great thing because having times where the game looks dark, desolate, and gloomy will end up adding to the immersion and ambience of the game, while we don't feel too overwhelmed by the game always being depressing. Dark, depressing atmospheres can also look just as good as bright ones. You simply don't need to always be eating crayons to enjoy the beauty of a game's environment. From what I've seen regarding criticism for Wuthering Waves, many have been saying it looks too edgy and dark, yet when we take a look at games such as Hollow The Last of Us, Nier, FromSoft games, and even hell, some areas of Genshin Impact itself, all of them are certainly gorgeous games in their own ways, but people will give Wuthering Waves hate for being too dark? To me, that simply sounds like hating just for the sake of it, without any real reason as to why. Let's take Genshin, for example. Genshin is usually very bright and colorful, but I felt Ankonomiya was the most gorgeous region in the game. Just look at it. Is anyone really going to complain when something is dark if it's this gorgeous? To me, complaints regarding the atmosphere being dark are people finding the silliest things to complain about because they don't have any real valid criticism. Next up is sound design. Everyone enjoys some good video game OST, and while that is part of my point, it's not my entire point here. Sounds as a whole are absolutely core to the experience of a game, even if they're quite subtle and aren't the first thing people think of when it comes to video games. They shape the identities of the games you play. I'm certain most people can recognize sounds such as these. Now, in this section I won't say whether or not Wuthering Waves has good sound design. I don't know, but I have heard from some content creators that some weapon hits didn't feel satisfying enough due to their lack of good audio feedback, and I can't comment on that. I don't know if the sound design of the game is good, but I hope it is, because it's very important for games to have good sound design. One thing I can confirm, though, is that Kuro Games always releases absolutely banger tracks for their games. Here's some examples. Onto quality of life. It's a broad concept, but many things add up to make a game feel a lot better to play. Having good controls is especially important, and a small part of the reason Kuro's previous title didn't succeed is because of the confusing control scheme. There isn't much to comment on regarding Wuthering Waves' control scheme currently because I lack info, but hopefully it has a good control scheme so it's better to play. How about other quality of life though? Things such as speeding up tedious tasks that have no substance is always welcome at any game, since they end up making sure that you don't get burnt out as quickly. Other small things such as having important quests closer to teleporters, making sure menus feel quick and responsive, and character loadout presets are all great things to have, and they all really add up to make your gaming experience better. Now for gameplay. This one's self-explanatory. Everyone's seen Wuthering Waves gameplay, and it looks damn good. Even if you're not a fan of this sort of combat, you can't really call it bad. And even though gameplay isn't required for a game to be good, it's still really helpful to have. Though I certainly hope that there's more stuff to this game that's enjoyable than just gameplay, because gameplay alone can't make a game good. For example, Tower of Fantasy has pretty damn fun gameplay, but that game is viewed extremely negatively because of how bad the game is overall. Next up, good story. A good story drawing people to a game is obvious. Who doesn't like a good story, even if you're too North American to read? I'm sure everyone's played a game or experienced a show where after they finished, they're just sitting there speechless due to how powerful the story was. As we all know, in the dev interview 3 months ago, they mentioned overhauling 90% of the story, and it's great to hear that the developers are so keen on making the game enjoyable that they do something that huge. Keep in mind, rewriting 90% of the story isn't just changing the script. There's also the cutscenes, dialogue, character designs that also need to accommodate. Now, whether or not the story changes they made are actually enjoyable is another thing, and I can't say whether or not it's good. We'll have to find out for ourselves on release. One thing that has me hopeful for the story, though, is that even if it doesn't end up being good on release, we've seen Kuro's willingness to go out of their way to try to make the game as good as possible. We can expect that in the future, they'll continue trying to improve everything in the game, including the story. Number 6 is movement. The quote-unquote feel of a game is extremely important to the long-term enjoyment of it. Does the movement feel nice enough that you can simply run around the world aimlessly and still have fun? What about the feel of gliding around? Is swimming an annoying, tedious process? Is climbing a mountain excruciatingly painful? Does the jump feel fluid and satisfying? And is there a double jump? How does your movement speed while just running around to random places feel? Hell, just being able to run up walls sounds insane to me. The movement is probably super satisfying. I don't know about you guys, but personally when a game has a nice feel to it with movement, even doing mundane things such as simply running around for everyday tasks or killing random enemies on the map is fun. Now for a big one, performance. Based on what I've seen around the internet, many people are worried about how well Wuthering Waves will run, and it's understandable why. Some people have 8-year-old potatoes. I can't speak on how well the game will run, but one thing I will say based off of my previous experience with Kuro is that Punishing Grey Raven runs extremely well on my Samsung Galaxy S10, which is a middle-of-the-pack phone. I'm not expecting a mediocre system to be able to run Wuthering Waves on max settings though, considering that this is a more modern game on top of being open world. Personally, my biggest concerns about the game are the little things, such as UI/menu interfaces. Will they have slow loading times? What about how long it takes to get into the game after opening the application? Some of these little details are a lot more important than others, but they certainly make the gaming experience a lot better. Have you ever had a time where you wanted to play a game, but then just didn't because you didn't want to wait through the load screen? We'll need to wait and see just how well Wuthering Waves will perform on our devices, and I hope it's optimized well enough to even be able to run on lower-end devices, because for many lower-end systems, this will make or break the decision of whether or not they play the game. The gaming market as a whole is pretty tough to accommodate for people with weaker systems, so if Wuthering Waves can run on them, that would bring a lot more appeal to it. Tower of Fantasy was a highly anticipated game, but it still managed to fail due to the performance issues it had on launch, with the hackers, bugs, and server issues. Speaking of Tower of Fantasy, the people comparing it to Wuthering Waves are simply out of their minds. I get it, Tower of Fantasy was hyped way more than it should have been on launch, and it disappointed heavily. But why is that? Tower of Fantasy's launch was an atrocity with the hackers, bugs, and server issues, and that all stemmed from the devs that clearly didn't care about the game whatsoever. When we compare them to Kuro, you can clearly see that Kuro cares about their game more than anything. They're striving for success, and they're one of the only dev teams in the gacha gaming scene who actually communicate what they're trying to do with their game, and they take feedback into consideration as well. Comparing them to Tower of Fantasy is extremely insulting. Now for multiplayer. This one's obvious. Who doesn't like messing around with the idiots you call friends? Some games' only real reason as to why they succeed is because you can play with friends. If we look at games such as Among Us and Lethal Company, both of them absolutely exploded in popularity simply due to the fact that they're a good platform to connect with others. I sincerely hope that Wuthering Waves has a guild function for this reason. The point isn't limited to simply friends though. The communities of games as a whole is also pretty important. Many game communities will be the deciding factor on whether or not people decided to play a game. Ever heard someone say, that game looks pretty good, but the community is annoying, so I don't play it? Or how about, the community of that show is pretty annoying, I doubt I'll watch it. My hope is that the Wuthering Waves community ends up being seen in a positive light. Ninth is a challenge. This one's pretty simple. Some people just want to play a hard game and feel good after beating a tough boss. Who doesn't like showing their skills off to others? That's why games have rank systems after all. Now for rewards. Genshin may be a good game, but the amount of premium currency given it is so pathetic that it doesn't feel rewarding to play the game whatsoever, which is why every other anniversary causes drama among the community. Games as a whole, even outside of gacha games, need to give players incentive to keep playing with rewards, whether that be with premium currency or other sorts of things. Gacha systems need to be satisfying, otherwise it'll make people want to quit the game. In Wuthering Waves, the gacha system is very similar to games such as Genshin, Honkai, Arknights, PGR, etc. However, Wuthering Waves has upgraded their weapon gacha to be guaranteed rather than a 50-50, which makes weapons a lot more free-to-play friendly than other games where you may end up never having a guarantee for weapons, requiring you to gamble your life savings in some cases. Of course, we're not sure whether or not Wuthering Waves will be rewarding later on into the game, since we're being exposed to the rewards of launch, which are always going to be a fair bit higher than the normal rewards of playing the game, so we'll have to keep an eye out to see if the game is rewarding later on. 11 is replayability. It can certainly add to a game, but it's not required. but it's especially important for live service games, otherwise it'll feel like they have too long of a dead period. Endgame is something that most games that want to provide a challenge have. It's required to give people the thrill they seek from building up their units and putting both their account and their skills to their limits. My hope is that the endgame in Wuthering Waves doesn't feel like a boring chore. Endgame in any game that's skill-based like Wuthering Waves should feel like a true test of skill, and my hope is that they continue to add endgame with even harder bosses that require many hours of retries. Having many different playstyles can certainly add to replayability as well, since it allows you to experience the game under a new lens where you can focus on different mechanics and progression. Another way to add replayability is adding different modes so that every player has something they feel like they can enjoy with their own preferences when it comes to games. Replayability is very subjective. Some people love achievement hunting, some people love farming, some people like 100% in games. I personally can't stand it, so each person will have to find a different reason to come back and play. In the end, the main thing when it comes to replayability is simply how fun the game is. When a game is extremely fun, people will come back and play it regardless of what happens. For now, I believe that endgame is a little lacking, but I trust Kuro to expand on it. There's still a good variety of endgame currently with holograms, Tower of Adversity, and the Elusive Realm. Next up is new player experience. This is a massive hurdle that developers somehow haven't realized is such a big deal. Don't you just hate having a tutorial that drags on for 20 minutes hand-holding you through things that are obvious? How about games that don't give you the experience they're looking for early on, even though you know the game gets more exciting later on? New player experience is extremely important and it can outright ruin a game for people. When it came to me, Honkai Impact 3rd had such a bad new player experience that I couldn't stand playing the game, so let's hope that Wuthering Waves is a good one. Now finally, character design. Similar to aesthetic, character design is subjective, but I think Kuro's doing an amazing job. What I will say though is that characters are an integral part of any video game that has them, and making sure their designs fit the theme of the game as well as their backstories and artworks being as polished as possible is a must. Considering that Wuthering Waves is a gacha game, Kuro needs to do a good job at making sure characters are interesting enough that people want to pull them. Otherwise, they simply won't make any money. This is a gacha after all. After all that, which of these points does Wuthering Waves have? If I'm not sure about one of these points, I won't count it. Does it have good aesthetic? Yes. Good sound design? No. Good quality of life? Yes. Good gameplay? Yes. Story? No. Clean movement? Yes. Performance? I'll say no. Has good multiplayer? Yes. Challenging? Yes. Rewarding? Yes. There's 200 plus puzzle obtainable. I'm not sure about replayability, so no. And I'm also not sure about new player experience, so no. Does it have good character design? Yes. Out of the 13 traits, Wuthering Waves has 8 at the very least. And more doesn't exactly mean better, but it does give us a bit of an indicator. Having all these qualities is rare for a game. Let's take Minecraft for example. Minecraft is the most successful game of all time, and I'll say personally that it only has 7 out of the 13 traits, showing that it's not required to have all of these traits. They just make your experience better. Writing this script I realize I've been yapping way too much. Next part will be short and simple. Why I'm so confident Wuthering Waves will succeed is the advertisement they put into it. Kuro Games is a developer that's been around for a very long time with the releases of Twin Tail Battleground in 2016 and PGR in 2019. However, those titles aren't very well known because they weren't advertised well. Even gacha gamers, only some of them know about PGR, and the game isn't that popular. This time around with Wuthering Waves, things have changed as we've seen Kuro putting in a huge amount of effort and money to advertise, going so far as to have multiple large displays in Times Square, and a bus. They've also sponsored many streamers along with running ads on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and other social media sites. Hell, looking at this video from Billy, Kuro Games has already started making Wuthering Waves merch, and they're showing off cosplayers, and other Wuthering Waves related things. Maybe the truck or the Times Square billboards won't do anything, but there's so many different forms of advertisement that we've seen for Wuthering Waves that I'm sure some of it will work at the very least. This game has reached 30 million pre-registrations, and I'll even ignore it just to play devil's advocate for those who are coping with the numbers, saying that it's botted. On Google Trends, Wuthering Waves is at the same level of Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. And of course, Google Trends isn't the most reliable source ever, so let's take a look at other things, such as the viewership of the biggest channel covering Wuthering Waves. Tektone's Wuthering Waves videos are making around 75,000 views each, with multiple daily uploads. Now comparing with popular Genshin YouTuber Dora44, he's gaining 150,000 views per video on average, with around 1 video per week. While it does seem like Tektone has less viewership, he uploads frequently enough that he actually gains more views. Of course, this isn't to say anything negative about Doro, it's just highlighting the stats. Still not convinced? How about the Wuthering Waves Discord having 350,000 members before the game is even out?
The Twitter having 460,000 followers.
And trailers getting 2.4 million views on average. Anyways, that's just all to say that the game has a ton of interest in it. The hype for Wuthering Waves is unreal. Many content creators have constantly been talking about this game, and the general gacha community is holding their breath waiting for the release of it. Some people say too much hype is a bad thing, but I don't really agree with that. Having a ton of hype means that people will find out about the game more easily. On top of that, being hyped in and of itself is something fun. Just take a look at Etika and you'd know what I mean. And finally, the most important thing of all, Kuro has been listening to feedback. I've already stated multiple times in this video, Kuro has listened to the community in many different ways. Most of the devs in the gacha space outright ignore player complaints, and Kuro does everything they can to make sure that players are happy. This is just outright unheard of in the gacha space, so Kuro is a step above the rest. In the end, all this yapping was just for me stating why I believe this game will succeed. I'm shocked if anyone's still watching this, and if you're still here, I truly thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means the world to me. Shout out to all these people on the screen who've inspired me to make this video and give content creating a shot. Hope you all have a wonderful day.